Hey everyone, my name's Angela and I'm doing a video today on how I searched for residency programs and kind of the process that I went through. I thought this would be a good starter to actual, content when it comes to actual steps to take. And I just wanted to reiterate that this channel is just to do some weekly chats that are no longer than 10 minutes, where I go through a variety of topics related to residency programs. I have an outline over here that I use, but really it's not too scripted, and I just want to kind of have a talk if you were someone who's interested in residency, pharmacy residency, and I was sitting in front of you and I just wanted to give you some useful information. So I was called the pharmacy student, I guess, on this channel, so you'll see some old videos related to my pharmacy student life, so in case you're curious, you can go look at those. So just to recap, residency, when it comes to that pathway after graduation from pharmacy school, there is general and or hospital residency, and then there's community residency. And then within general or hospital, there's a couple different specialties, and the one that I'm interested in is ambulatory care. So typically that's 1 to 2 years of training. I'm going to be doing hopefully 2 years of training, and I'm applying for residency right now. I haven't matched yet. Match day is coming up March 19th. So I may match, I may not, but still I'll kind of give information if I don't match and kind of what my process is with that. But yes, I'm interested in ambulatory care and academia, and just a couple reasons for that. I love the idea of being a clinical pharmacist in the ambulatory care setting, having one-on-one interactions with patients, and I love the academia component of teaching and mentoring, which is partly why I'm doing this channel. So one of the electives I took in pharmacy school was on ambulatory care, and so I asked them, how did you narrow down your search? I feel like I could go anywhere in residency program. I'm not too limited, and I kind of just wanted to I just want to get one. So what should I do when I search for residency programs? Because my interests are so broad in the sense that I could go anywhere, and I don't really have a huge preference besides ambulatory care and academia. And resident who was teaching that day gave me a good piece of advice. She said, figure out some non-negotiables and some things that kind of anchor you to where you can filter out, because if you don't, you're just going to be searching forever and you're going to have no kind of filter to get you to where you really want to be. So one of those anchors is location. Are you wanting to go in or out of state? I personally want to go out of my home state because I have heard from others that it's good to see how pharmacy is practiced in other areas if you plan to come back to your home state. Now, I would like to come back to my home state, although I don't really know, but I do want to be competitive for jobs after residency training, so getting that out-of-state experience will make me more competitive if I do come to my home state. So that was a pull for me, but you have to think about your family. Do you need their support during residency? Do you need them close by? What's the cost of living where you're going to be doing residency training? What's the weather like? What's the culture and the people like? There's just some areas that I knew I would do better in, and then some areas that I knew I wouldn't do as well in. So that was an anchor that I filtered other residency programs through. And then the size of the hospital is really important. I wanted a large academic medical center that had a lot of diverse patient populations, a lot of pharmacists to learn from, a lot of variety in the different learning opportunities. But some people really like the community hospital. They like that, that decreased load, not as big of a center to work in every day, not getting overwhelmed, and maybe more one-on-one time with their teachers. So that's something else, the size of the hospital. And then the learning opportunities are probably one of the biggest ones. What kind of rotations do they have? Do they have the kind of structured learning experiences that you want? I wanted a blend of inpatient and outpatient my first year, and that included ambulatory care opportunities. So, but you're gonna look at electives too, some longitudinal opportunities if that's something that you wanted to keep in mind. For AmCare specifically, we have a lot of longitudinal clinic opportunities, which I love, and so I wanted that component. And then sometimes orientation, people want to know that there's a sufficient orientation process, because as a resident you'll be staffing, and that takes a lot of training and work, getting trained in those areas, because we haven't had to do that as pharmacy interns or as pharmacy students. So the other options that you need to look at are just like, I called it the work. So the staffing component, how often are you staffing? Usually it's every third weekend or every other weekend, and some people really have a preference one way or the other. There's on-call and pager responsibilities, which may be great to others, not great to some. What are you going to be doing as far as presentations, your grand rounds, your CEs? How many of those are there? I personally would love that, so I would like to have many opportunities. What are the research components like? How many projects are you working on? What kind of presentations are you going to be responsible for? And then just the others, this is probably not an anchor, the other components, but those first 4 that I listed, I would consider like anchors, where you kind of make a decision, you find out what you really want if you had to choose, and then you kind of go from there. But Other special opportunities that I liked was leadership. That kind of put a spin on things where I liked that program more. If I could be a resident mentor or like a chief resident, that was appealing to me. They have teaching certificates, research certificates, just really formal processes where you can put a stamp at the end and say, I have really grown in teaching and research, and here's a certificate of that. If you can be a committee member, if you want to work with a certain professor or a certain department or a certain area. So those are just other special things to think about. So those are like your anchors, your non-negotiables. And then you should ask around. You should just ask your preceptors on your rotations and say, what did you do for residency training? What would you recommend even after you've gone through the training? Would you do anything differently? And faculty too at your school, who's taught you? Usually on the websites of your university, they'll have the PGY1 and or PGY2 training of your faculty members. If you like what they do and you think they're smart, where did they train? It probably had an influence. You could probably set up a meeting with them. They'd love to tell you about their training and tell you about that program. And otherwise, people at work, local pharmacists that you work with, they kind of can give you a good perspective on that. So once you kind of know what you want and you have a couple names even in your back pocket of programs you'd like to consider, you would go on to the ASHP or American Society of Hospital Pharmacists website, and they have a search engine, which I'll link below to this video. And you would start looking for programs. You would filter them, usually by state is what I did. So I pick a state and look at that, and I would do PGY1. And again, if you're doing PGY1 in a certain area, they kind of have filters for that. But you would start looking, and then you would click on that site, and it would be, or sorry, click on that program, and they would have a big layout that's somewhat standardized. ASHP tries to make it somewhat standardized, where you could look at the type of hospital, the number of residents, the number of beds, the the admit date, or sorry, the start date, application deadline. And then if you click the link where it says NMS code, that just helps you know the code that you would then enter into Forecast, which I'll talk about later. But Forecast is where you actually apply for residency programs and put in all your information. So don't really have to worry about NMS code and Forecast. This would just be a first step to get a name of the programs that you like, read the description. And often in those ASHP monographs for different programs, they will have a link to the actual institution's website where you could look at that residency program. And I would always try to follow up and go to that institution's website, because ASHP sometimes lags as far as updating things, but the company or the university's website or the institution's website usually is way more up to date. So you always want to double check things. And if there's discrepancies, you can always reach out to the program director or the RPD, who usually is in charge of things, and see, what the discrepancy is. Hey, I see on ASHP it has 4 residents, but on your website you say you have 6 residents. Which one is it? I'm just curious. I want to know. And then what I did was I made an Excel document, because I'm a very organized person, and I would put the names of the programs, and then I would put different qualities and categories of things that I liked about that program. So how many residents did they have? And I didn't mention that could be an anchor too. I wanted to work with at least 1 or 2 different residents and have a decent resident class. So that's something, whatever's important to you, put as columns and say, yes, this program has it, or no, this program doesn't. Kind of like the location, how long does it get from there to home? What's the salary like, number of residents, all those kind of things. And you can kind of keep a running list as you start going through rotations and as you start going through that search process, and come back to it and reflect on it and compare side by side. Is really nice. So just some general tips. Start searching early, but not too early. I really did a lot of my search in May, but some people even plan their searches and kind of look at programs when they're planning their APPE rotations. So that's something I didn't consider, and I wish I would have kind of looked at local programs, so that when I did my local rotations, I could try to pick places that potentially I wanted to apply for residency for. So early, but not too early. It'll be a continuous process all the way up until pretty much December or November. You'll keep looking. I'll do a different video on planning your rotations around residency, because that's a whole nother topic. But try to look when you're looking at programs, and if you're not quite sure, they usually have online question and answers and get to know us kind of things, so that's good. You can show your face, you can give more information. And then I'll talk about later kind of like the fit, finding a fit with the program, because that's going to help you know if when you apply, you're going to be successful with that application and get an interview. So that's all for today. I'm keeping this under 10 minutes. Thank you for watching. Please share with others who would find this helpful, like the video, comment below other topics that you'd like to hear from. I'll be posting these weekly, so I'll check those comments there after I post this. So thanks everyone.